When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
Hi, folks. Gene Valentino. Welcome to this special edition of Grassroots Truthcast, March 23rd, 2024. We're with Israeli Defense Officer Elliot Chodoff. Elliot comes to us live on this recording, I should say, from Israel. He can disclose where in Israel he is. Elliot is an Israeli Defense Forces officer specializing in military intelligence and strategy for both the elected political side and the military side. Welcome aboard, Elliot.
Great to be back.
Yeah, you want to add to that bio I just gave you?
I live in the north of Israel. Just one simple correction. I'm not an intelligence officer. I have subordinates who claim that I'm not even an intelligent officer, but we'll leave it at that. I'm more on the operations, tactics, and doctrine side.
But intelligence is what you advise other military folks in. Am I wrong about that?
Analysis more than intelligence.
More analysis. Okay. Yeah. Well, very good. I appreciate the correction. And folks, we're very proud and appreciative that Elliot is able to join us. He has been with us going back to last August and September of 2023, right here in the Grassroots Truthcast airplane hangar in Pensacola, Florida. He and I had an episode, which you'll find on www.genevalentino.com. We had a subsequent interview soon after the Hamas invasion and annihilation of 1,200 Israelis in and around October 7th. And since then, the inventory shows, if that's the right terminology, the tally shows over 1,200 human beings were killed as a result of this Hamas invasion and assault on Israel. Today, as we speak, June 23rd, we have at least 134 hostages somewhere in Israel, somewhere in the Gaza, that are still unaccounted for and missing, some of whom are Americans. They're either dual national citizens or they're true Americans. Nonetheless, there's 134 people sitting as hostages in the Gaza Strip right now. That's often forgotten about in the military discussions we're about to have with Elliot. Elliot, I'd like to say I don't know where to begin, but I do know where to begin. When are we going to get these kids back, these hostages?
Well, first of all, they're not all kids. And here, I think we should clarify that the official number is in the 130s, but the likelihood that half of them are still alive is probably closer to the real number. In other words,
well, so that if they are not alive, were they tortured and put to death, or are they starvation or something?
No, they were murdered.
And your assessment of that gives is probably correct, because I won't press as to where this information is coming from. But is it murder, or is it starvation or sickness?
No, it's murder. It's murder. The Hamas are terrorists, and they took over 200 hostages, but we've rescued a few. We're defeating them soundly, methodically in Gaza. And there's a point at which, and I hate to say it this way, but for them, too many hostages becomes a liability. So
It becomes too much of a liability for them or for us and Israel?
no, for them. In other words,
Because
because they have to take care of them, they have to maintain them. If we're moving in an area that we're about to take over, they don't want them rescued, so they will sooner kill them. It's hard to move with hostages. They're slipping around through tunnels under Gaza, and quite frankly, they're simply a bunch of brutal murderers. So you ask a perfectly good, moral, reasonable question: why kill them? But remember, these are the guys who entered Israel, and as you mentioned at the outset, murdered 1,200 people without batting an eyelash, filming a good deal of it on their GoPros and putting it online.
proudly, that's what drives me nuts. Before I shift the tables and talk about the Chuck Schumer commentary and Israel's attitude towards Bibi Netanyahu, your prime minister right now, before we go there, what is what on the Hamas side, on the Hezbollah side, is there no compassion or acknowledgement maybe of this massacre they caused to Israel?
No, there's no acknowledgement. We have to go back to its origins, I think is the best way to do it. There's a lot of talk about the cycle of violence, especially up in the northern border with Hezbollah, but also with Hamas. There's no cycle of violence. These are organizations who draw their ideological roots from Naziism and via the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt. And their stated purpose is to destroy Israel and annihilate the Jewish people. And they say it outright. And pardon us, but we don't want to be wiped out. So we're fighting back. We're defeating them. The importance of utterly defeating them was graphically shown today in Moscow last night, where ISIS launched this horrific terrorist attack at the concert hall outside of Moscow. The last count that I saw was over 130 killed. And this is the ISIS that was defeated, but not eradicated. And now they're coming back for payback in Russia. Well, I don't think that we can afford to leave an organization like Hamas able to come back with payback in 2, 3, or 5 years. So that's what's happening on the ground. And this isn't about negotiating or about fine points.
We have so much to cover, and before I go back to ISIS, I want to focus on how many enemies of Israel have been killed right now since this attack on Israel last October.
So we're estimating about 15,000 terrorists have been killed.
Would you call them all Hamas or Jihad
Hamas
Muslims in general, or?
No, first of all, Hamas is Sunni. Hamas or Islamic Jihad, they're working in
concert
tandem together.
Yeah.
In Gaza. The Gaza Ministry of Health, which is a Hamas ministry, claims that something in the order of 32,000 people have been killed, but they make no distinction between terrorists and non-combatants. And their numbers are being shown more and more to be false. As a matter of fact, a paper came out a couple of weeks ago by a professor of statistics at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, showing that statistically, Hamas's numbers have to be falsified.
Reason for that?
For example, the total number of deaths is growing in a linear fashion. In other words, it's sort of a smooth line going up. Now, reality in warfare doesn't work that way. You have hot days, you have cool days, and here every single day the increase is proportionate to the day before. So that might happen in 2 days or over 3 days, but not over months. He
Is
he
is
showed
there
that
a
there's
is there a
yeah.
point, Elliot, where Israel steps up and says, "We've had enough of this. We've just got to do the total incineration and wipe out"? What's Gaza's future? When will Hamas truly be cleaned out?
We have taken out something on the order of 18 Hamas battalions. And here I want to clarify, Hamas is a terrorist army, as is Hezbollah. It's not a terrorist organization. We're not back in the good old days of small groups, 3 terrorists, 5 terrorists, as we saw on October 7th, 3,000 terrorists invaded Israel. So of their 24 battalions, we have eradicated 18 of them. There are 4 more in the city of Rafiah, commonly referred to by the Arabic name Rafah, but Rafiah is the Hebrew pronunciation, and 2 more battalions in the center of the strip in places called Nusayrat and El Burej. So there are 6 left out of 24. These are not their crack battalions. We've already wiped them out. So we have, I would say, 2 more major operations left ahead of us that are in much smaller scale than what we've done already in Gaza City and in Khan Yunis. So when will it happen? Those are military questions that I can't go into. We're doing cleaning up still. Now we're still in the tail end of an operation in Shifa Hospital in Gaza City that we went into once before. We now went into it again a few days ago, and we have pulled 1,000 terrorists, dead and alive, out of that hospital. Think about that.
That's significant. If you could have it I remember last October when we had our special report together. I posed the question, is this going to be another Vietnam? Are we in this 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months? And you, rather with a firm conviction, you said more like 2 months, but not 2 years.
I'll still say that. We're about 5 months because October, the ground maneuver didn't begin immediately. It began in November. And one of the reasons that it's taking time is because we're being careful. We're not carpet bombing. There's fighting going on. But, it's interesting. They say there are 2 million Gazans, 2 million Gazans. There are still 2 million Gazans. If we had wanted to go in with what America calls shock and awe, there would be a lot fewer Gazans around today. So it's kind of, you can't have it both ways.
Well, that's good to hear. We have a professor here in New York City. His name is Jeffrey Sachs, director of Center of Sustainable and Development at the Columbia University. He says that Israel is an out-of-control government. True or not true?
Nonsense, not even not true. You have another professor in New York named John Spencer, who's the head of urban warfare studies at West Point. He's a combat veteran. He's a colonel in the National Guard. And I'm going to say that again, the head of urban warfare studies at West Point. And he says that the Israeli military is performing brilliantly, given the urban warfare situation that it's in, and is doing above and beyond to protect civilians. So I'm going to go with the professor of urban warfare studies over in a war over a professor of sustainability in a war.
Point made. And he went on. This was an interview with Judge Andrew Napolitano, someone I revere. I just can't believe Napolitano had this guy on, and he was so far. He went on to say that Netanyahu is, at this point in time, just based on the starvation issues alone, and the massacre of Gaza hospitals, he claims that Netanyahu should be tried on war as a war criminal. I had to play it back and listen to it again. What's the reality on that accusation?
So first of all, the reality on that accusation is this: we have either ourselves or facilitated the shipment of over 200,000 tons of humanitarian aid into Gaza. If we're trying to starve them, that's a really weird way to do it. Second, as far as the hospitals are concerned, I'll just come back to what I said before. Shifa Hospital that we're operating in now, we've killed and captured 1,000 terrorists in that hospital. Now, anybody who knows even a little bit about the Geneva Convention knows that the minute the other side turns a hospital into a military center, it ceases to have the protection of a hospital. So who's responsible for the fighting in the hospital? The Israeli army that's going in to take out the terrorists, or the terrorists who went in the first place seeking shelter in the hospital?
Well, your counterpoints are perfect, which is why I posed them to you. This Dr. Jeffrey Sachs went even a step further to suggest the Israeli Defense Forces are actually pushing the Gazans towards Rafah at the Egyptian border, pushing them all into a concentration into the Rafah area for a pending massive annihilation. Your comment on that?
We wouldn't have to do that. We have sufficient firepower to kill them in droves if we wanted to. If we wanted to kill them in any event, we wouldn't be shipping and facilitating hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies going in there. We wouldn't be working with the Americans to build this pier to bring in naval aid from sea. We wouldn't permit the overflight of aircraft that are dropping humanitarian aid from the air. Not only is it simply nonsense, it flies in the face of everything we're actually doing. And the fact is, here again, coming back to the Geneva Convention, Geneva says, when possible, evacuate a civilian population from the combat zone. So,
that's exactly. I wanted you to have your say on that because I am prepared to interview anyone else you suggest. But I now want to turn the table, and I think an apology is in order from America to Israel. On March 14th this year, Senator Chuck Schumer, a majority leader, head of the Senate here in the United States, was calling for Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's ouster. He says other elements of our government are downplaying what took place just after October 7th. He's trying to suggest that this method by which Netanyahu has responded was either outdated or out of line or not commensurate with the current opinions and feelings of Israelis today. Yes or no?
Absolutely false. First of all, let me try to break this down into a few different subjects. I am appalled that an American senator would get involved in Israeli domestic politics as if we are not a free and open democracy. And you don't have to like Netanyahu, and that's a whole different question. But to call for the ouster of an elected prime minister of a democracy, I think American leaders sometimes forget that there's democracy outside of the United States.
Well, we've tried to prop up democracies in other nations, and I'm glad we did, and we put a lot of money behind our actions as well. I think where the mistake here is that we overstep at times, and I call it an overstated sense of self-worth, and I think he exemplified that. I will tell you this much: I don't think it represents the majority of the opinion in the United States. We loved the relation of Prime Minister Netanyahu, especially with Donald Trump, and how much was accomplished during that era. God willing, we see a return of those two being able to shake hands together as leaders again. But until then, we're stuck with this this initiative and what I fear is what I call a mass formation psychosis, this brainwashing that goes on through the media of trying to spin public opinion for or against a given issue. What reason would they even accused Lindsey Graham of being a warmonger and caught up in the Defense Forces economic military complex operation, and Chuck Schumer's trying to figure out a way of holding back on military aid for Israel that we should be providing. What say you?
Okay, so first of all, let's come back. Holding back military aid to Israel when Israel is at war is not exactly the way you behave with a friend and an ally, to say the least. Not only would it be bad for Israel, it would be bad for the United States and its relationship with its other allies, who can very quickly be looking around and saying, you know what, we can't rely on these people when the chips are down.
Well, I think many nations of the world are already doing that, and I fear we may be looking around, seeing our only ally is Israel, maybe Great Britain, but I'm not looking much further for any help to help. And no one's helped us on our southern border. It's always been on us. No other nations come forward to help us with our own internal crisis running in parallel to yours.
But I want to come back to the Schumer issue for a moment. Look, the issue of Netanyahu's popularity in Israel is complex, like all domestic politics. His poll numbers are way down, but not because of the war, not because of the handling of the war. In other words, there are other issues, and it's internal politics. It's for our discussion, they're not that important, I don't believe. But I'll add, he was prime minister when the disaster happened on October 7th. He hasn't taken responsibility. That has hurt his polling as well. Let's leave that. I'll tell you something else. It's a very important rule for me, and this is true in the United States as well as in Israel and in other places. The only poll that really counts is the one on election day when people go to vote. Okay, so all the others are a little, are a little sketchy.
That's true. That's true.
Let's, for our purposes, say that his poll numbers are not good, but not on the issue of the war. And here we need to understand something else. The Israeli government's management of the war is not Netanyahu alone. There's a cabinet called the War Cabinet. The Prime Minister of Israel is not the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, as the US president is. In other words, the Prime Minister, unlike the American president, cannot give orders directly to the armed forces. The only person who can give orders to the armed forces is the defense minister, who has to operate within the framework of what the cabinet says. Now, let's look at that cabinet for a moment. Netanyahu is prime minister. Defense minister is Yoav Gallant, who was a deputy chief of staff of the IDF with a great deal of combat experience. The other two members are Benny Gantz, who's not from Netanyahu's party, and Eisenkot, whose first name escapes me at the moment, it's not that important, both of whom were chiefs of staff of the IDF. In other words, we have a war cabinet made up of 3 generals and Netanyahu. And I will tell you, since I happen to know all 3 of them, not closely, but personally from my military experience, none of them are shrinking violence. In other words, if Netanyahu does something against what they determine, you would know about it in a second. It would be out there. These are not people who would keep it in and it not come out. In other words, that was a long way around to saying the way the war is being handled in Gaza, it is being determined by a cabinet and not Netanyahu, the individual.
Then why are they coming after him? Why is someone like a Schumer and others coming after him with such a and your former prime minister going back to 2006 to 2009 Ehud Olmert. What's
Olmert.
with him? He can't get rid of Netanyahu fast enough in a recent interview.
Ehud Olmert went to prison after he was prime minister for corruption.
Okay.
That should be enough. Ehud Olmert was the prime minister during the disastrous war against Hezbollah in 2006. He's got an axe to grind. And
well, Neil Cavuto had him on Fox News this afternoon, Saturday, and today, and it was an indictment of Netanyahu, and it was something that Mr. Cavuto should have expressed about his about Omar's sentiment against Netanyahu, which never came out in the story.
look, you know, I don't have to tell you because it's true in the United States as well. Personal animosity among politicians,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
they
that's
they
true.
don't like Netanyahu. Biden doesn't like Netanyahu. Schumer doesn't like Netanyahu. Obama didn't like Netanyahu. And you know what? That's their right. They don't have to like him, but don't lie about him.
What would you say the next step would be if you had a perfect crystal ball? How does this war with Gaza end up?
We're going to have to go into Rafiah sooner or later. Right now, it's being held back by mopping up operations that we're doing in the rest of the Strip. And here, the whole war against Hamas is a multi-phase war. And I'll come back to what happened last night in Russia. They stopped short. In other words, they defeated ISIS on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq, but they didn't eradicate the organization. We are defeating...
They weren't eradicated because there was some level of appeasement, would you say?
Yes, but that's my point. Look, the devil is in the details. The final operation is the nasty one. Okay, because that's when that nasty from the point of view of it's not efficient, it's not tanks rolling, and it's going after the small groups of 3 and 5 and 10 guys where you're going to take disproportionate casualties because of that, and you ultimately have to get to the leadership and eliminate it. It's slow, painstaking work, and it's not an overnight job. And the world likes to see the job done overnight. What can you do? That's part of the criticism against Israel now.
Yeah, you have absolutely described what I feared most about this war, and that's outside Monday morning quarterback or sideline opinions coming in when you're not in the battle yourself and don't understand the dynamics up front and personal. You get these commentaries that slip out in the media and regrettably become fact in the minds of a lot of ignorant citizens, both in Israel as well as the United States, by the way.
You're not so much in terms of the opinion, because here you have to understand that there's a very big difference between the Israeli population and the American population vis-a-vis warfare. Okay, an article came out recently in the Rand Corporation pointing out that it's inappropriate for America to be trying to use the Afghanistan paradigm on Israel and Gaza. And I'll throw in one of the reasons for that is because America lost in Afghanistan. But a more important reason is that Afghanistan is a half a world away. Gaza is walking distance from Tel Aviv. And that makes it immediate. It's rocket distance from Tel Aviv, as we have seen. That makes it immediate. But there's another element here as well. A couple of days after the massacre, we mobilized between 350 and 400,000 reservists. Now remember, we're talking about a country of 10 million people. So 400,000 reservists is a lot of citizens who suddenly found themselves in uniform. These are people, some were sent up north to face Hezbollah, and some of them are still up there. We're waiting for that shoe to drop. But a whole bunch of them went into Gaza. And that population, and I was one of the people who was mobilized. I spent 29 days in the reserves in November, in the South, in the Gaza division. We're not so easy a population to tell media stories to. We were there. We were on the inside. So what you have instead are reservists coming out and saying, the media is not telling the truth. We're not being influenced by the media. We're pushing back against it because we know the truth. Now, take those 400,000 reservists, and granted, there are families that have more than one or two reservists in it, but you know what? Let's say 200,000 families whose family members went into the reserves. That means you have an immediate impact on millions of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something, the last time that happened in America was World War II.
Well, and it was in World War II when Hitler, there was an appeasement of Hitler. He can't be that bad. Not
That's
every
right.
single person thought that he was a terrorist and an annihilator.
Chamberlain thought he could negotiate with him.
What?
Chamberlain thought he could negotiate with him.
Yeah, look where Chamberlain ended up, and look what burden Churchill had to suffer from as a result of Chamberlain's inaction.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
in that same context, when Donald Trump wins the next election, what is Mr. Trump going to be dealing with that was handed to him by the inaction or the malfeasance of a Joe Biden right now, today, as we speak? Is there this notion that you are expected now to initiate some level of appeasement, and almost as if you have to forget about 1,200 people who were massacred? I don't get it. Why is this notion even on the table, both in Israel and in the United States?
It isn't so much in Israel. Once again, I think there are individuals in Israel. There's a small group that is, for one reason or another, calling for an immediate ceasefire. Here, I'll tell you, some of them are doing it because they want a hostage deal at any price. And while I vehemently disagree with them, you know what? Families of hostages can say outright, my family member's life and safety is more important to me than the entire rest of the world. Legitimate for them. That doesn't mean I have to listen to them.
No, I submit to you that that is, in fact, the argument. And I really feel bad for Israel because I don't think the message is out there that they have surgically struck these hospitals and
Not even surgically struck the hospitals. We've gone into them to get the terrorists.
And that's what I mean. I don't mean to suggest
were not struck by mission.
It was a mission against terrorists in the hospital. Yes. It wasn't the hospital itself. Even though that's correct. Well, so what's your feeling then on appeasement? I mean, is there any room for it anywhere? What happens to a two-state solution if you go through appeasement?
So first of all, I'm a Churchill fan. Churchill defined appeasement as feeding your friends to the crocodiles and hoping they eat you last.
I read that. That's true. Yeah, he had a way. He had a way with words.
I like Churchill. Look, appeasement doesn't work because the crocodile's appetite just keeps, comes back. And in the end, you end up with no friends and hungry crocodiles.
So I'm going to assume, if there's no appeasement, that Netanyahu, on a committee of 4, which makes military decisions, not Netanyahu in a vacuum,
correct,
means that there's going to be some intention to surgically remove Hamas, which
that's stated outright.
He has stated it outright. And the concern is that because he's stated that, there's this righteous indignation that Netanyahu has turned into a Hitler of some sort. this is, I understand that where this is going. Let me change the subject just a brief second. Well, not a brief second, more significantly. Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Jihad Muslims, the Muslims in general, have in their doctrines of religion the intention to kill. They even use a term called taqiyya. Taqiyya meaning it's okay to lie from a Muslim biblical point of view, from the Muslim doctrines. If you're lying to a non-Muslim, to kill the non-Muslim. And what I see happening here in the States, there's the squad of some 4 or 5 congresswomen that are just off the rails, trying to support a Muslim Hamas Palestinian. Why, it was just a generation ago with Obama on bringing those Somalians into Minnesota or Wisconsin, and illegally, by the way, and now there's about 100,000 of them more because they've grown in size up there. These are people who have been strategically, it seems to be a plan in place worldwide to eliminate the race of Christians and Jews for Muslims worldwide. If I said that to you just like that, how would you react?
I would disagree. I would say you have to make a distinction. You're drawing with too broad a stroke. There is a radical Islam that is a political religious movement. To say all Muslims is, as I said, overstating the case. Radical Islam is enough of a problem. We're talking about a huge number of people who have politicized and radicalized, and I mentioned earlier, radical Islam comes out of off the pens of a few early mid 20th century ideologues, probably the most important of whom was Sayyid Qutb of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they fused radical Muslim religion. And here, look, let's be honest. All religions have the ability to go different ways. And we've seen it among Jews, we've seen it among Christians. We have to be honest about this. What typically happens on the Jewish and Christian side is the radicals remain on the outer edge of the extreme. What's happened here is that radical Islam, which has fused a radical view of Islam with Nazism, and I say that again, it's not a coincidence that we're finding copies of Mein Kampf in the homes of the Hamas leaders. They're Nazis. That fusion is a toxic mix. It is followed by a lot of people. I don't want to give numbers because it's very hard to parse this out in precise numbers. But you know what? If there are over 1 billion Muslims in the world, if 10% of them are radical, that's 100 million people.
But 100% of the Muslim faith and its religious doctrines talk about the elimination of the non-Muslim. They want to
not exactly.
Well, educate me, because this to me is a serious issue. It's the foundation of how they're moving into Europe. How long do you think the old European culture, the old European ways are now infiltrated by Muslims on every corner? Who's next? Israel and then the United States? How do you look at it?
So once again, we're talking about a very large number of radicals, radical Islamists, jihadists, who are having a great effect, particularly on the younger generation, for all sorts of reasons. High impact. And that high impact is being felt particularly in Europe. And again, for a whole bunch of reasons that it's not even a discussion. It's a course plus. And I'm not poo-pooing it at all. It's a serious, serious threat. But I can tell you, there are Muslims who look at it and are horrified by it. So we have to be very, very careful here. Not everybody buys into it. Just as, by the way, not all Shiites buy into Khomeiniism.
Yeah, that is true, Elliot. But my concern is on the other side, not everyone's buying into the other side either, meaning
I agree with you. That's
the
my,
yeah. Well, look at the Canadian government. They've just announced and had a decision not to send any more arms to Israel.
correct. Look,
What happens to the
got,
What happens to the relationship between Israel and Canada?
if it doesn't reverse itself? First of all, it's unconscionable. But let's be serious. This is Canada. It's more symbolic than anything else. They're not going to send us some night vision goggles and some police vehicles.
Right.
Okay. But it is symbolic. The idea that you cut off a country that is fighting an enemy that just launched the kind of attack that Hamas launched and said outright that it's going to do it again. In other words, this is not about revenge. This is about preventing another one from happening again in the future. And
which to me is the basis for why Netanyahu and your defense committee should continue its attempt for the total
and absolutely what they plan on doing.
Okay.
I will tell you with high levels of certainty that if they end this war with Hamas still in power in any sort of way, this country will go on strike against them.
Oh, wow,
okay?
That's pretty significant.
Okay,
that's the headline.
There are reserve units that were pulled out of Gaza because we don't need that much force in there anymore, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But there are reserve units that were pulled out of Gaza that were protesting. We are not going home until the job is done.
Well, there was a United Nations that recently had a resolution to force you to try to get you to initiate a ceasefire. Yeah. It failed because there were two objectors. One was the United States.
No, the most recent one was proposed by the United States, and it was rejected by Russia and China.
Russia and China, that's right. Yeah. So kind of makes the point. Where does this go from here? I don't understand what happens to Israel if anyone interferes with your ability to finish the job.
I think that ultimately we have to tell those people, after Auschwitz, you're not going to tell us how to defend ourselves.
Well, I couldn't say it better. You don't have to. A mass annihilation is occurring in many other areas of the world right now too. We just don't know about it, or it's hidden from intelligence. But certainly, the annihilation of the Jews in Germany at the time from World War II should be a world lesson. And some of the deep state activists who are trying to hide this kind of truth from the world is why we have educators from the far left not even talking about this in high school history classes, as if it never happened. Oh, it must have been made up. Yeah, man walking on the moon came out of a sci-fi movie too. That wasn't real either, right? Yeah. Okay, so your point is very well made. I'm just trying to figure out. That's what I was getting to earlier when I said the problem is specific to Israel. You have the right to defend yourself and to respond as you deem appropriate. You all, whether the United States has the true story or not to mention the rest of the world, you have a right to have righteous indignation against the likes of a Senator Chuck Schumer, who I think is on his way out, who speaks about trying to remove Bibi Netanyahu. If that was the case and Netanyahu was so bad, why didn't he suggest the removal of the three other members of your defense committee?
Yes, and in addition to that, your question is a rhetorical one, obviously, because it's about Netanyahu for them. It's not about the reality. Let me add another point to this, because I think this is also important. The Israeli system, as a parliamentary system, is far more flexible in terms of leadership removal than the American system. The only way you can remove a president is by impeachment. In other words, by convicting him of a crime. In a parliamentary system,
Well, he's impeached, but there need
I'm
not
talking
even
about
be
convict. No,
you don't
yeah,
even need a crime. You just can impeach him. They did it to Trump. What crime did he commit? Yet he still got impeached twice.
no. What I'm
So,
saying is, leaving for a moment the veracity of the charge.
okay,
Okay, the mechanism is that the president must be convicted by the Senate of a criminal charge.
okay,
Okay, leave for a moment whether it's political and whether it's correct. The mechanism says that a president can be removed for high crimes and misdemeanors. Forget for a moment whatever that means. It's a criminal accusation. Okay, in a parliamentary system, the parliament can dissolve the government over policy issues.
okay.
Okay, in other words, it doesn't have to claim that the prime minister committed a crime. It simply says we have no more confidence in you as the government, and the government falls.
I
And
wish
it goes
they
to election.
I wish they applied that logic to Chuck Schumer getting removed.
Okay, but you understand the point is
I
that
do understand. Yeah.
if the Israeli parliament, which is the direct representation of the people, decides that it wants to get rid of the prime minister, it simply removes him. That
Yeah,
is a mechanism that you don't have
okay.
in the United States.
I understand the distinction on the procedure. I just have no faith in the process that's caused the problem in the first place. I don't mind rights being defended. I always go back to a favorite adage I use with friends and family and on some of these podcasts. Failure to defend the rights of other people may someday result in your rights not being defended.
Absolutely.
I don't understand why. And you know, here's what's very interesting that's happened recently. You started this conversation almost an hour ago about ISIS attack in Moscow. You know how that happened? There was some information that came out that showed that there was a pending ISIS attack on Jewish synagogues in the Moscow area.
Yes.
And within 24 hours, you had American intelligence, coincidence, reciprocating, saying, hey, Putin, hey, Moscow, hey, Russia, watch out. Our intelligence shows that you may have a terrorist attack on a public building in the Moscow region in the next 48 hours. Son of a gun, what was on the news yesterday? A complete civic center or major
Controversial. Yeah.
being how many people? Over 120 people killed thereabouts in by a rapid fire gunfire by allegedly ISIS terrorists infiltrating that. How quick they were to try to blame that on Ukrainians attacking.
Yes. Right.
So just thought I'd share that with you. It seems to be going on around the nation where even Russia is now saying, well, I better go back. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I may have some new alliances pretty soon that I may have to reconsider. On that point, what do you think about maybe the hostages being picked up by Egypt or Saudi Arabia? Why doesn't anybody talk about maybe those two countries holding as neutral ground the hostages while
Because
Gaza?
Hamas isn't
Of
gonna
course
give them
not. I'm making another rhetorical question, but isn't it no small coincidence they would have a lot to gain economically, if not from Israel, certainly from the United States on this?
Of course, but Gene, here you have to understand something that became very apparent after October 7th. And I'm going to put this in the starkest possible terms. The world doesn't care what happens to the Jews. We saw it with the response to the rapes and other sexual abuse that took place on the 7th. Women's movements to this day, not a peep out of them. The hostages, including, as you said earlier, American hostages, dual nationals, or Americans who are visiting in Israel, and other nationals, nobody cares because they're Jewish. The Red Cross is not visiting them. Nobody says a word. But Britain says that if we don't allow the Red Cross to visit the Hamas terrorists that we've captured, they will consider cutting off arms supplies to Israel. I can go on, but the point here, and apropos the rapes and the sexual crimes, there's a movement going on today in the Jewish community called Me Too Unless You're a Jew.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but how about
every rocket they fire is a war crime. Nobody says anything. They have fired rockets at our hospitals. Nobody cares about Israeli hospitals.
I come away from this interview, Elliot, a little taken aback. I'm stunned with the level of calm you have over what I would consider such a abhorrent state of affairs on Israel right now, that you take almost in stride, like ho hum. I'm not insulting your position. I'm not taking an insult to your. Please don't misread me. But you're sitting back and you're taking a ho hum attitude, like, oh my words, yeah. Well, I'm 40 miles away from Lebanon, and Hezbollah could fire a rocket on me anytime. And sure enough, I'm just sitting here, and yep, this beautiful home I have could be nailed with a rocket easy, because those 250 rockets, Russian made, by the way, are sitting on the Lebanon border. Hamas has got them pointed towards you. Oh, excuse me. I had my digits off. I meant to say that 250,000 Russian rockets pointed down on Israel. 250,000 rockets on Israel. If that ever happened here in the United States, war would have already broken out.
That's right. So first of all, I'm a student of Jewish history. Tonight is the holiday of Purim. They tried to wipe us out then too. The world stood by and did nothing. The king hands his signet ring over to Haman and says, "Go ahead, do it. Let's have a drink." This is nothing new, and anybody who studied Jewish history is not shocked by any of it. Am I outraged? Of course I'm outraged. I'm outraged that countries like the United States, with their high moral standing, turn around and can't see the difference between a murderous, rapacious terrorist organization and a Western liberal democracy fighting for its survival. But frankly, Gene, I have to tell you this. This is your problem more than it's mine.
Okay, now why do you say that? I think I know the answer, but give me the answer.
Because if America loses its moral compass totally, it's going down.
Can you be patient? That moral compass is off center now. I give you that. I concede. But until November 2024, we have allowed such a and here's what I've also can tell you from the American side of this picture. I have seen a groundswell of the silent majority who has always come away in this constitutional republic sitting against a backdrop of a democracy, or we try to make it a democracy. These silent majority people have really said enough is enough also. And I think and here's what needs to change within our governance, which I preach about all the time here in the States, that we need a constitutional amendment. We address rights issues in amendments to our original founding document, the Constitution. And there are 27 such amendments in place now. We need a few more amendments that address term limits to get some of these 40-year veterans in politics gone after a term or two or three. We need a balanced budget, which no one knows. They can't even spell it, let alone understand it. Balanced budget, so we're not rocketing money into different nations of the world on a slingshot effect from the whims of one president whose cognition we question. I look at how much money's involved in helping Israel. Let me rant for a minute. I look at how much money Israel asks for or needs, and compare it to at least $120 billion we've given to Ukraine, and only $7 or $8 billion was needed to finish off that wall end to end, which Trump was in the middle of. And unilaterally, in the middle of the night, days after he's sworn into office, Joe Biden turns around and unilaterally kills all of Donald Trump's initiatives, domestic and abroad. To me, is an absolute disgrace. It's probably done more harm than anything else, Elliot. And I pray that he has the ability, Trump, to set the record straight and bring this silent majority to the table to take the initiative to getting good leaders in place, getting rid of AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, and 3 others in the squad, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, Jerry Nadler, Chuck Schumer. I'm missing a few, Eric Swalwell and Adam Schiff, and I could go on. And oh, by the way, Chuck Schumer on the Republican side, need to take a powder. That's American for go take a rest, go enjoy your retirement and drink your tequila drink somewhere, and let a new generation of leaders step up. What the deep state is counting on, which is what I fear for Israel in the same way I fear it for America, is in the deep state, they're counting on that next generation we call the Gen Zers. They're so stupid. I can't speak to what's going on in Israel, but in the United States, that Gen Z crowd is pervasive, and they haven't learned American history, and they couldn't tell you what the Bill of Rights. You're an Israeli, dual citizen, admittedly, but as an Israeli, I bet you know what the Bill of Rights is. I bet you know what the Declaration of Independence is, and you're Israeli. Can I say that to a Gen Zer right now? So when Trump gets back in, we need to get rid of this whole Department of Education and let the states take control of a more advanced criteria of education at the local level that's not politically based and funded from the United States taxpayer through a budget we don't even know about. That's my 2 cents. Thank you for listening to it. And in that process, I hope we renew the relationship, which, if I was an Israeli, I'd be pissed off right now at America for allowing a Chuck Schumer to even have had the audacity to step forward to make such commentary against Bibi Netanyahu. How's that for apples?
Oh, I'm with you on that one.
Okay, in our final minutes,
Yes.
I apologize in a sense for ranting, but I'm glad I did. You're an ally and you're a friend. And I think Israel will never lose its true friend and ally, the United States of America.
I would hope
Like
not.
in every relationship, whether it's a marriage or a government political involvement, there's stresses and tugs and pulls on certain days. And I think we're having some consternation on that point right now. I ask you if you could capsulize today's conversation. Let me rapid fire you 5 questions in 60 seconds. When does Israel wrap up the attack on Hamas?
2 months from now.
2 months from now, Hamas is no longer a factor, just like the United States did with ISIS. Pardon me?
It's no longer a military factor. At that point, we'll be able to reduce our forces there to the level of dealing with the remnants that'll still be there, but it will have no more operating battalions.
Well, we eradicated ISIS in the same light, and look, they just resurfaced in Moscow. Okay.
Because they weren't finished everywhere, but go ahead.
Okay, question number 2. What happens to this 2-state solution in general? Is it gone by the wayside, or is there any way for a ceasefire to reach some settlement?
The 2-state solution is a an interesting idea that requires many, many steps along the way before it can be gotten to. At the moment, it looks like a Rube Goldberg contraption. And my philosophy is that the more a policy looks like a Rube Goldberg, the less likely it's going to be able to work. So and by the way, even the administration says it that way. The Palestinian Authority needs to be revamped. New leadership needs to come in. There's a lot of stuff that America has absolutely no control over. Israel has no control over. If we're waiting for those things to happen, we're waiting. We'll see. Right now, it's not a realistic alternative.
Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon. What happens in Lebanon and 250,000 missiles from Russia at your door?
There are between 80,000 and 100,000 Israelis displaced from the border with Lebanon who are internal refugees in Israel. Nobody talks about them. Their homes are being destroyed by Hezbollah as we speak with anti-tank missiles and rockets.
In Lebanon.
In Israel. I'll say again, 80 to 100,000 Israelis.
Forgive me, I misunderstood. Say that again. Israelis
have been taken from their homes along the northern border with Lebanon to get them physically out of range of Hezbollah. They are internal refugees in Israel, and their homes are being destroyed on a daily basis by Hezbollah anti-tank missiles and rockets. We must remove Hezbollah not only from the immediate border area, but from south and central Lebanon. They're not going to go willingly. We're going to have to go in after them.
Elliot, where is that in the 6 o'clock news? I have not heard about this assault from Hezbollah out of Lebanon.
Yes.
Where is this in the news? No one's reporting it.
I hear the booms every night and day.
I won't disclose your location, but let's just say you're north. You're very far.
I'm in the north.
Okay. Well, Jordan, on one side of you, how friendly have they been in helping you with Lebanon's attack on you?
Jordan has not a player in this. It's
because
Syria and Lebanon, and they are heavily influenced by Iran, who's really the bad guy here. But that's a whole story in of itself, not for this conversation.
From a diplomatic point of view, from a political point of view, what influence have you had with decision-making with politicians that are controlling this agenda?
My personal influence is not on the political level, it's on the military level. And I've had some, but a system at war is not easily influenced. Here, frankly, overall, the Army is doing a very good job.
How much of the funding of the military budget relies on the United States?
Less the funding and more the equipment. In other words, the money in and of itself is less the issue. I don't want to say not an issue, but less the issue. More important is, in part, due to poor policy on our part. The artillery shells that we're firing today we didn't have in October. We've gotten them from the United States. We're not producing them fast enough.
You're not producing them fast enough. Okay. Do you foresee any improvement in the relationship between Israel and Russia?
No. Putin is his own problematic character.
Yes, he is. Look at that. I mean, problematic characters like that just get reelected.
Yeah, 86% of the vote. It helps if you kill off all the opposition.
Well, yeah, not only that, but you're scared to vote against him for fear you may not make it home.
That's right.
Okay, on that score, what's the relationship with China from Israel's point of view?
Very poor.
What's China doing to hurt Israel?
Supporting Hamas.
Okay, I wanted to hear that. And Hezbollah?
China less Hezbollah unless it's coming through Iran, which is possible. Let's keep in mind there's a big difference between Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas is a proxy of Iran, supported by others, Qatar, for example. Hezbollah is part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's part of the operation. In other words, they are built in. I call it a wholly owned subsidiary,
Of
which is
Lebanon,
of Iran,
of Iran.
okay, which is different from Hamas, which is a proxy. They get support, but they're not really part of the Iranian system.
So if you want Biden to realize there's already a two-state solution, tell him to look to Iran and Lebanon.
Right.
There's your two-state solution. And funny, but really not. I get it.
But you know what we say? What those of us who recognize what's going on in American politics say that Biden already has a two-state solution: Michigan and Nevada.
That's true. And on that issue alone, he could be impeached if the truth be known for making so many of the illegals become residents there. That's another issue for another day as well. And
Yes.
I have one final question. When do I come to Israel to see you in person and to do a live report?
You have an open invitation. Buy a ticket. The steak's on me.
The wine's on me.
Done.
Okay, Elliot, any final words for those watching here today?
Only, you mentioned the silent majority before. Stop being silent.
The silent majority has been a problem in the United States because we've relied on our elected officials to represent us, thinking they were doing our bidding for us, only to find out that in many cases they are not. And so what you're seeing just in the school systems alone is families stepping up, that as a small isolated issue, representing a much bigger issue nationwide. They're stepping up to become active participants again. I just hope they get. Go ahead.
I was referring to the Israel issue. What we're getting here is that the public is opposed to Israel, where the ongoing demonstrations that are not just anti-Israel, they're pro-Hamas, they're anti-Semitic on the level of gas the Jews. That's what's making the press here, and we're not seeing the pushback from what I imagine is a decent number of Americans who are not pushing back against it.
Okay, one question then. How much of the press in Israel is pro-Hamas?
How much of the Israeli press is pro-Hamas?
Yeah.
Zero.
Well, I see some press in and around Israel that seems to be pro-Hamas, Hezbollah, claiming that Israel's overreach. Do you have any independent journalists in Israel speaking the other side of the issue?
Let's say this: there is one newspaper called Haaretz, which is very, very far to the left, that is read more by foreigners than by Israelis.
Interesting. Okay. Any final words for Americans and worldwide?
Get on the right track, and otherwise, the terrorists that came to us a few months ago, you're next, as the Russians learned.
As Donald Trump has mentioned and others, they're after me today, but tomorrow they're going to be after you, which ties into my comment. Failure to defend the rights of these other people may someday result in your rights not defended. On that note, Elliot, I want to thank you personally, my friend, for being with me again for another episode. This has been truly enlightening for me, and I hope the folks watching and listening take the time to realize just how important this micro issue in the world is. Yes, 10 million people in Israel, the same number that have illegally come into the United States. And it should begin to awaken the silent majority now and cause us to be alarmed at just how serious the protection, as Ronald Reagan and others have said, our democracy is only one generation away from failure. And that applies to anyone espousing a democratic constitutional republic throughout the world. Elliot, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Grassroots Truthcast. We've been with Elliot Chodoff, an Israeli Defense Force specialist who has who has provided consult and advice both on the military side and the political side, not as much, but an active himself as with the Israeli Defense Forces as a reservist in Gaza, so has seen a lot of action up close and personal, and speaks from experience as to what's been happening since last October 7th, 2023. Let's hope he's right, and in 2 more months, we'll see an end to this war in Israel. Thank you for joining us for another episode on Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. This special episode will be on genevalentino.com. Please subscribe, and please share this episode with family and friends. This is the true story, the inside story of what's happening in Israel. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us for Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and God bless America.